The first case is a primary gravid, known case of hypothyroidism on thyroxine 75 microgram, well controlled. The difference from the case Jabasa had put up is she's a well controlled case coming for first antenatal checkup soon after missing the period. Is it necessary to increase the dose of thyroxine? She's well controlled, sir.
I think, so Dr. Betsy, you are asking question to me because I was asking question to you during your undergraduate level, right?
Okay.
Okay. Yes, I think so we partly discussed this topic. Okay. Say, question is, non-case of hypothyroidism on thyroxine 75 micrograms, well controlled. I think you should define what is the definition of this well controlled, right? Okay. So if you are maintaining a TSH 2.5 with antibody up to 4 without antibody, that is acceptable, right? And what we feel that, see, during first trimester of pregnancy, I'm asking another question also. This question, fetus requires maternal thyroxine in the first trimester. So when you look into the physiology, previously when I was a student for MD General Medicine, we thought T4 is not crossing and TSH is not crossing, TRH is crossing. Now we have sufficient data to say that T4 is also crossing and that is responsible for the fetal development also. So definitely that will cross, maternal thyroxine will cross, there is no doubt about that, right? Okay. And your question, what is written in the American Thyroid Association journal edited by Dr. Alexander et al., you need to increase the dose of thyroxine to maintain your target level. That's the answer for the question. And second sub-question is how frequently. Now, recommendation American Thyroid Association and European, they feel that it's a little vigorous assessment, probably 4 to 6 weeks. And Indian Thyroid Society, they're having little relaxed approach to a 6 to 8 weeks. But I feel that, say 6 weeks is very optimum. You can check the TSH and you can modify the dose of thyroxine. But mind you, especially in certain hospitals and certain clinics, you can't believe the FT3 and FT4. I'm repeating the same sentence again and again. So you should be very careful if you are looking into the thyroxine level also. So TSH is very good, pretty good investigation, and most of the laboratories are doing very well. So you can see TSH alone and you can take a decision. And last, fourth question, is it necessary to reduce the dose? Yes. Suppose a patient comes to you during pregnancy, not for this patient, during pregnancy, if you are starting thyroxine molecule, depending upon the TSH level, postpartum phase, you can stop it. And if the TSH is pretty high, you have to continue. Otherwise, you can stop it. Or prior to pregnancy, during pregnancy, all these points we already discussed. There are 3 schools of thought. You just give 2 extra tablets, right? Okay, instead of 7 tablets, you just go for 9 tablets per week. That is one recommendation. Another recommendation is look into the thyroxine or TSH level and you can modify the schedule. So the various recommendations are. And when to check, we already discussed. Over to Dr. Betsy.
Jabasa, one more usual problem is many of the labs will only do T4 and send back to us. So if actually in your presentation you had mentioned even if total T4 is done, we can do adjustment depending on the age and the pattern. Can you just elaborate on that?
This is not my comment. This is what is written in the American thyroid journals, right? Okay, like your T4 is 10, just 1.5 times. Right? Okay. During pregnancy, because of the physiological alteration, you will see elevation. Colloquially speaking, pseudo elevation, whatever, right? Okay. Up to 1.5, right? See, say if the T4 is 10, only 10, max up to you can see up to 15, something like that, right? Okay. This, but we are not doing it, but that's very useful method. We are following, sometimes we are following that.
So up to 1.5 times is acceptable, sir, total T4?
Yeah, that is acceptable. The elevation is acceptable in pregnancy. It's a physiological alteration.
So another query which had come from the audience is like first trimester, many medical companies are coming with folic acid and potassium iodide combination. Is it scientifically acceptable?
No, I don't think that is not, we should not entertain that. Okay. We should not entertain that. And if you remember, see, one brand with some sort of funny combination. I know the company's name. I don't want to name the company's name, but we should give only thyroxine sodium. Bas, that's all. Nothing but even the iodine. Ambuja madam was asking, iodine supplementation. Iodine supplementation as such is not indicated. If you are taking nutritious food, balanced diet, there is no need, because most of the preparations or dietary stuff also contains iodine, and you are taking iodide salt also. Now, what is our headache is, if the patient has got thyrotoxicosis, sometimes we have to restrict iodine intake in the active phase of thyrotoxicosis. So we should tell the patient, don't take iodine. Iodine salt iodine cherkathu. You go to Nitya or you go to any supermarket, it's very difficult to locate N9 iodide salt, right? So you are using iodide salt. Such a situation, iodine supplementation in the form of drops, tablets, all those things are not indicated. That's all. Over to Betsy again.
Thank you, sir. Next slide, please. Okay, Primigravid at 8 weeks of pregnancy with a TSH report of 125. Again, something which you had already put up. What to do about the dose of thyroxine? This is the patient is presenting for the first time with TSH of 125. What should be the dose of thyroxine if a gynecologist is starting?
Yeah, exactly. This is very common issue. At least in medical college hospital, people, of course, you know, medical college status, patient status is different, right? So we used to get this type of references, and the gynecologist obstetrician, they want to get the permission for MTP, right? As per the recommendation, current thinking and recommendation, MTP is not indicated. That is number one. Then your question, what is the dose of thyroxine? There's a paper by Kaplan. In fact, we are also following that schedule. If the level is more than 10, okay, even in the up-to-date recommendation, you start with the full dose. Full dose, you know, as per the textbooks, 1.6 micrograms per kg per day. That comes around, see, our patient's weight is around 50 only. I think now 100 micrograms more than enough. Okay, very vigorous increasing dose is really not helping us. So you can wait up to 4 weeks and see what's happening. Only with this TSH, don't send the patient for medical termination of pregnancy. After 4 weeks, you can check the thyroxine, TSH and thyroxine, and you can modify the dosage as per the reports. Even if the thyroid antibodies are negative or positive or high, very low, doesn't matter. You can continue the same schedule. Give thyroxine, see the thyroxine level after 4 weeks, and make the modification. That's all from me. Thank you very much.
Sir, like when should a gynecologist order for TPO antibodies?
It's a good question. ATPO is indicated. Okay, as per the recommendation, I will discuss the recommendation. If the TSH is more than 2.5, yes, you can. Number two, multiple or infertility issues, definitely ATP is indicated. These are the definite indication. But what I feel in this, most of the situation, you can ask for ATPO, but definitely you can anticipate criticism also. But there are definite indications which we already discussed. And if you are doubting the possibility of thyroiditis, antibodies, there are two types of antibodies, ATPO, anti-thyroglobulin antibodies. We are doubting the possibility of thyroid Hashimoto's thyroiditis. ATP is negative. Such a situation, you can go for anti-thyroglobulin antibodies also. Okay.
But
thank you. Over to you, Betsy.
Treatment does not differ, no? Anywhere our management will not change.
Yes, I told you that. See, I'm the patient. My TSH is 4. Okay, 3. Okay. No antibodies. Current thinking is you can just wait. Okay. Right. If the level is less than 2.5, okay. If antibody is positive, you treat. Others don't treat. Because the treatment schedule is also differs.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, please.
When the TSH is less than 2.5, we usually don't do the anti-TPO antibodies. So there is a situation where anti-TPO antibodies can be euthyroid and then they recommend L-thyroxine. So actually, it's a bit confusing. So can you clarify on that? So we don't do it usually.
you need not do that. So if you are doubting the possibility of thyroiditis because of many reasons, you can do that. All right? Okay. So you have a goiter, fame goiter. Okay. Such a situation, definitely it's useful. Okay.
Sir, understood.
Jayaprakash,
2.5 to
you
4.
can add. Jayaprakash, you can add.
Yes, sir. I think with the family history also, if you have a strong family history,
Hashimoto,
then you're dealing with the subfertility, then definitely anti-TPO antibody is indicated. See, the problem with having a TSH is just like having a random blood glucose value. And the timing of TSH is important. The value we are talking about a very narrow range, 2.54. So one TSH of 2.5, maybe 2.8 tomorrow. So that's why if you have anti-TPO antibody positivity and if you're dealing with infertility, if you're trying for ovulation stimulation, then there is a small vague area in those guidelines also. There is no benefit in, there is no harm in treating. So a small dose of thyroxine may be given if you are dealing with a marginal high, say 2.5 or 2.6 with anti-TPO or anti-thyroglobulin antibody positivity. But the aim is to keep the TSH less than 2.5, not to keep it suppressed less than 0.4. So that would be the aim, to keep it to 0.4 to less than 2.5.
Another problem, madam, what we are facing in the laboratory. Laboratory is a real issue for us. Okay. In certain laboratories, you can't believe anything. Right? Okay. You can call it in our medical college hospital, we used to call it a sync method. Right? Okay. It's very common. Right? I have practical or I have a personal experience also. Okay. And they're doing TSH, T3, T4, TSH for 100 rupees, which is almost impossible because I have the laboratory, of course, government laboratory. So with 100 rupees, impossible. Okay. There are the reliability of the lab is also very important in this context. That's a message. In this crowd, and I can't give the details of all techniques. Right? Okay. Over to Dr. Betsy.
So same patient as in this slide, her TSH is 125. So what difference will anti-TPO antibody or anti-thyroglobulin antibody make for this patient?
It's only for for treatment purpose, there is no issue.
No issue.
ATPO for this type of patients, not for assessing the treatment treatment schedule. And this is for diagnose what type of thyroid disease. Exactly, that's an issue. People are asking for a lot of investigation unnecessarily, right? If the patient has got features of thyroiditis, clinically also you can ask the opinion of Dr. Jayaprakash, Dr. Unnikrishnan, Dr. Ambujam, Shekaran sir and all. If you palpate the goiter and firm goiter, little subnodularity, something like that, such a situations, definitely ATP is useful. Not in all cases. And we have seen a lot of prescription asking for T3, T4, FT3, FT4, TSH, and ATP or ATG. That is not indicated. You should look at the clinical picture and ask the investigation to the point. That is our teaching in medical college hospital.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much, sir.
Just to add to that, may I just add to that?
Yes, yes, sir. Please, sir.
Yeah. So I think, just to summarize, because if the TSH is more than 10 or if there's clear hypothyroidism, anti-TPO antibody has got a value only for prognosticating, in the sense that, the TPO is positive, you can tell the patient there is a probable cause of your hypothyroidism, you may need to take long-term treatment. The second situation is the TSH is 4.2 to 10. Then if you do the anti-TPO, it will predict people who are anti-TPO positive, it will predict their need for eventual overt hypothyroidism by a factor of 2-fold. So that may have a scientific basis. Again, you can counsel the patient about the need for therapy, and that could be an additional reason to understand therapy. Now, the question is, if TSH is 2.4 to 4.2, if there is a poor pregnancy outcome, if you check the anti-TPO, if it is positive, there is one randomized control trial which has shown that in these group of people, 2.5 to 4, TPO positivity, giving a small dose of thyroxine has improved pregnancy outcome. So in those cases, selectively, you would like to give thyroxine. Now, like Dr. Jayaprakash mentioned, what about a TSH of 2.5 to 4, where TPO is negative and there are still history of adverse pregnancy outcomes? In those cases, of course, the evidence says not to give, but in a very selective basis, if you think a small dose of thyroxine could help.
That's right.
So this is, my reading of the situation.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Jabasa, this patient has been already started on 100 microgram. And then after maybe 4 weeks or 8 weeks, whenever we are repeating, TSH has become lower, lower limit of normal. Should you reduce the dose or will you be continuing the same dose?
Dr. Bensi, your aim is maintain TSH to a target range. That's your plan. Okay, you should reduce it. But unlikely to develop that type of suppression with this data. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Next slide, please.
Dr. Ambujam, see, madam, I want to ask a question because we have seen a lot of prescriptions saying that steroid treatment for ATP. What is your comment on that? For Sjagren sir also contribute. This is for my information.
Presence of TPO antibodies indicate some sort of autoimmunity. And actually, we don't give steroids for that. Actually, we go for steroids for APLA syndrome, where you can get the lupus antibody or the lupus.
Not the APLA. We are not discussing APLA.
But for isolated this TPO antibodies alone, we don't prescribe steroids unless the physician recommends. We get a physician opinion and we don't go for that. But for APLA only, we give the steroids.
Yeah, place different. Okay. And see, for your information, people are started using immunoglobulin also for ATP positivity. Of course, it's only trials. Okay, started using that. Okay. Yes, Betsy ma'am.
Yes. Sir, about subclinical hypothyroidism, about after delivery, we started for subclinical hypothyroidism, and after delivery, what should be the protocol?
Subclinical hypothyroidism.
Yes, sir.
Subclinical hypothyroidism, if you have started thyroxine, we already discussed this point. Thyroxine during pregnancy with a very mild elevation, you can stop it. Okay, subclinical hypothyroidism only during lactation doesn't have much value for giving this thyroxine. Okay, you can stop it. But if the level is very high, otherwise patient has got indications for giving thyroxine as evidenced by goiter and rising titer, something like that. Antibody positive, Dr. Unnikrishnan was discussing. If the patient has got a positive antibody, these patients in future they will go for overt hypothyroidism. Otherwise, only for subclinical hypothyroidism, no need of continuing the treatment. There are definite indications for giving thyroxine in subclinical.
Yes. So one more question from the audience. You mentioned about 1.5 microgram per kilogram of thyroxine dose. Is it the same for all? That's what it's a question from the audience.
No, madam, see, this is what is written in the textbook. Okay, you can go for full dosage. Full dosage means 1.6 microgram per kg per day. Okay, but it almost comes to your 88 or 100 micrograms. All right. Okay, but these are all trial and error. You need not look into the strength, all those things. But by and large, this is trial and error. You can start thyroxine and you can go for you see the frame of the patient. Okay, if the patient is having a little hefty, you might have to go for a little more extra. But basically, it's only trial. Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Betsy. Any comments from Sjagren sir?
My doubt was whether we should have a universal screening for, in pregnancy by TSH at least in every pregnancy, because the prevalence of subclinical hypothyroidism is almost 10%. And until unless you diagnose and treat, I am worried about the baby's brain development, because the baby depends on the maternal thyroxine the first almost 3 months. So by the time, if you are not going to start treatment, the hypothyroid effect, whether it will have some effect on the baby's cognitive function later on. That is my question. So whether we should recommend routine or universal. American Thyroid Association doesn't recommend. I think Dr. Unnikrishnan was also passing a comment that not necessarily to go in for a routine screening. What about the final opinion now?
Actually, we are doing it in our patients, sir, isn't it?
We are doing it, but is it the recommendation?
I think Dr. Unni was discussing the classical standard recommendation. 100% that is acceptable. But I have a feeling that for our patients, the prevalence is very high and it's very cost-effective treatment. So for me, definitely I'll go for universal screening. That is not the recommendation by professional forum. This is my recommendation. Trivandrum and that.
We are also doing it, but there was no recommendation by the American Thyroid Association.
No,
the prevalence is very high.
ITS is giving some recommendation. Undi, please.
Well, let me just clarify that, what is recommend when you say universal screening, you're saying every woman planning pregnancy in the country being screened. But when you're saying purposive screening, a patient coming to your clinic is being screened. Now, some criteria are there for screening to be effective. The disease should be common. It should be easily treatable, and it should have a significant morbidity. Now, I agree that subclinical hypothyroidism may have some morbidity on the IQ, etc. Is the morbidity enough to justify screening? Remember, the fetal thyroid gland develops after 3 months. So it's only for the first 3 months. The fetus takes the thyroid T4 from the mother, and using fetal deiodinase, the pituitary or the brain of the fetus converts it into T3 and uses it for brain development. Studies have shown that this increases the axon connections and the neuronal synapses, etc. Now, remember, no study has conclusively shown that subclinical hypothyroidism is associated with a mental retardation or something like that. It's only a matter of a few IQ points. This is one of the reasons why many parents also come, many mothers also come worried that, my child's TSH is 5 and I'm pregnant and my baby is going to get a problem. So it's just a matter of a few IQ points. Yes, every mother would like to give her child the best possible IQ. No question. Don't want my child to get 3rd rank. I want my child to get a 1st rank if possible. So that's few IQ points. Everybody would like that. So that point, a purposive screening is good enough. But to say that everybody, universally, all women should mandatorily undergo a TSH-T4 before pregnancy, maybe requires a little bit more thought, but I agree that we should do it in our practice. This is my view.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
What's the protocol in Trichure, madam?
We are doing it routinely before 12 weeks. We are doing it in the first trimester because the prevalence is very high.
I think it's free for us, so we can do that.
Yeah, that's another thing, I think it's good to test every woman coming into the clinic for thyroid function. That's a good practice.
Yeah, correct. At least TSH.
TSH alone. Yes, TSH.
We are doing TSH only.
Can I ask you one question? Is there an association between hypothyroidism and autism? Autism in children?
Not aware of that.
Sorry, madam. I can't give an answer for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I will have to read up.
Now we will take up the other situation, the hyperthyroidism. Dr. Sangeeta is there?
Yeah, yes, Sajid.
Okay.
I direct my question to Dr. Unnikrishnan. Before I go on to actually these questions, there are some questions from the audience that I'd like to clear. There was a question about how actually would you ask a woman to get her TSH done? Should she get it done fasting? Should she get it as a random measurement? Should she take her thyroid tablet in the morning and then do her TSH? There are some doubts on that. Dr. Unnikrishnan, could you clarify this, please?
So, I think whenever you go for a thyroid function test, some people ask whether you should fast or not. It's not mandatory, but fasting is a good thing to do the thyroid function test. I'll tell you why. There are 2 reasons for that. Number one, that every day you are telling the mother to take the thyroxine daily morning on empty stomach. But ideally on the day of testing, they should not be taking the thyroxine. They should give the blood test without testing the without taking the thyroxine tablets. So then, why is that? That's because if you take it on the day of testing, if you take the thyroxine tablet, the T4 can go marginally high. So because of that reason, you are telling people not to take the tablet. So what I tell my patients is, you go in the morning, give the blood test for T4 and TSH, take your pill and then have your breakfast. That's the most important reason. The second reason is if you say non-fasting, I agree non-fasting is good enough. But remember that if you studies of 24-hour TSH levels have shown that the TSH levels are more or less uniform till about 2 p.m. Now, after 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., the levels, the intraday variation is a little bit more. And after 4 p.m., the interday variation is more. After 4 p.m., the interday variation becomes even more. So ideally, the good time to test is in the morning. Given a lot of variables concerned, I prefer to tell my patients, go in the morning, do the thyroid function test, take the tablet, have your breakfast. That's the ideal time. Now, am I very keen on if somebody walks into the clinic at 10 o'clock and says, doctor, I want to do my test now. Can I do it? I'll say, of course you can do it. Have you taken your tablet? Sir, I took my tablet 2 hours ago. And I said, okay, it's good to wait for another 2 hours because up to 4 hours, the T4 can be elevated. After 2 hours, you give the test. Sometimes patient says, I have taken my tablet at 6 o'clock in the morning. Can I do the test now? I say, go ahead and do it. So either fasting or 4 hours after the pill is okay. Just to make it simple, I tell my patients, do the thyroid function test, take your tablet, have your breakfast. That's my general advice. And it's I think okay to modify it according to your practice also.
Thank you so much. That makes perfect sense. Just another thing, somebody had asked, can a TSH of 125 actually be subclinical hypothyroidism, or is it the fact that my T3, T4 that I have asked for is not right? Is that why it is coming as a normal value? But do you see subclinical hypothyroidism with a TSH of 125?
Madam, the answer is very simple. Sorry.
Go ahead, sir.
Please,
go ahead.
Please.
Please.
No, Madam, Dr. Sangeeta, it's unlikely because 125 is pretty high, very high, severe hypothyroidism. Such situation, we would expect very low levels of T4, probably less than 2 micrograms. Okay, but for the proper diagnosis, for documentation purpose, you should check the T4 also. Yes. Okay, in order to make the document should be very proper. Okay, regarding the TSH assay also, all the points described by Dr. Unnikrishnan is very, very acceptable. But most of the patient will come to you at 10 o'clock only after Khana and all. So they won't do it. Okay, so for practically you can go for non-fasting sample also, fully knowing the limitations. Okay, over to you.
Dr. Unnikrishnan, the small dose that we've been talking about, we've always thought that in pregnancy you start a dose, it should be 50 micrograms. So with this 2.4 to 4.2 with the TPO positive, would we start 25 or 50?
If the TSH is above 4.2, I would start with 50. Okay. If the TSH is between 2.5 to 4.2, I would start with 25. Okay. Nowadays, there is this 37.5 option also available, which is closer to 4.2. You can try that out. Okay. But, this would be what I practice.
Perfect. So coming to this question, a primary gravid, this is sometimes what we face. A primary gravid comes to us at 8 weeks of pregnancy and with hyperemesis. Maybe she has a twin pregnancy also and she's really vomiting a lot. We presume her beta-HCG values are very high. And considering that her beta and her TSH level comes as 0.001. So do you really need to treat, or do you really presume that for some time till she gets over her hyperemesis, it is because of the beta-HCG mimicking the TSH? The thyrotropin.
I think Dr. Sangeeta, it's a very, very common situation in our hospital. Very, very common because you have sizable population, okay, in our place. So this TSH little discomfort range, okay, 0.01, but still, I would think this could be a case of gestational thyrotoxicosis. Okay, and now look into the yes. Now,
will we do anything?
Yes.
Provided she doesn't have a tachycardia, she's all right.
Now, see, if the patient is otherwise, pregnancy is one condition where you can't believe any of the clinical manifestations. Okay, all these two situations, pregnancy, thyrotoxicosis, coming under the category of hypercatabolic state. So the clinical examination won't help you, but certain things will help you. Presence of goiter, past history of thyrotoxicosis, treated, non-treated, something like that, right? In the presence of autoimmune disease also, you can suspect presence of ophthalmopathy, all this, and the patient dancing, this is inappropriate to pregnancy. Such a situation, you can think about the possibility of associated graves also, okay, right? And is it necessary to treat? Otherwise, patient is stable, clinically stable, nothing to suggest a possibility of a classical Graves' disease. You can simply observe the patient, especially your age is around 30, it's not a 50 plus patient. Definitely you can wait. Now, the third point you wanted to discuss, when does the HCG driven, okay, and CG effect weans off? Usually the classical recommendation is by 20th week, okay, or by 20th week, you will get a resolution of thyrotoxicosis if you are dealing with the gestational thyrotoxicosis alone. And differentiating Graves' disease and gestational hyperthyroidism basically is only clinical method, and certain investigation will help you to differentiate if needed. Like number one, clinical point is we have discussed. Number two, even though it's a double-edged weapon, you can go for antibodies, thyroid TSH receptor antibodies. If it is positive, you are comfortable. If it is negative, you do not know where we stand. Yet another investigation, of course, iodine scan, all scans are absolutely contraindicated. You can go for the Doppler assessment of thyroid vascularity, which will help you with a lot of limitations. You don't have any normative data to differentiate, but still sometimes that may be useful. By and large, just wait. If no issues, and patient will improve. It's very common practice in our prevention. Over to Dr. Unni and JP for their comments.
So I completely agree. So there are three possibilities here. One is gestational transient thyrotoxicosis. Second is Graves' disease, and the third is, of course, trophoblastic disease, which, of course, the gynecologists are better at diagnosing. So in gestational transient toxicosis, the symptoms are more related to vomiting and other symptoms. If it is Graves' disease, as Dr. Jabbar said, there'll be proptosis of the eyes, there'll be a goiter, which will be warm, and there'll be classic signs of thyrotoxicosis. There may be history of autoimmune disease, previous history of Graves' disease or anti-thyroid drugs. That will be the second possibility. Of course, trophoblastic disease of the other etiology, you get typical, ultrasound features and vaginal bleeding, etc. In most of these cases, like Dr. Jabbar said, we would not treat because a mild degree of hyperthyroidism, whether it is Graves or whether it's because of gestational transient toxicosis, it's not bad for the pregnancy or the baby. So we would observe and we would expect it in 19th to 20th week to resolve. But if there are warning signs of Graves, which suggests that, then I would do a TSH receptor antibody and think of treatment. Or if the T4, T3 are very high.
Okay, thank you. Can I have the next slide? This is a patient. She came to us with, she's a known case of hyperthyroidism. She's fairly well controlled prior to the pregnancy. She was taking carbimazole, 10 milligrams a day. She comes with a positive pregnancy test. And in our minds, always carbimazole is anomalies. Should I change? Should I continue? Should I switch to propyl thiouracil? So what is your call on this? Would you actually stop it? Because there are now the latest recommendations. You can give it as well. So what would you do?
Oh, it's a beautiful question. In fact, I wanted to discuss this topic because I burned my finger recently in Trivandrum Medical College. Okay, the question is, patient has got hyperthyroidism. Absolutely fine, very comfortable with the 10 milligrams of neomacazole, and patient is pregnant now. What next? As per the recommendation, current recommendation is, the sentence is very, very funny. PT is an option, no doubt about that, but I don't want to start PT. PTU is a dangerous molecule, I would say. Because, see, Dr. Sangeeta, probably we were in Paripalli that time. We lost 2 patients because of PT-induced hepatocellular necrosis. All right? Okay. Very funny. One of the physicians was giving neomacazole and PTU because of some reason, I don't know the reason, and we lost the patient. So, as per the recommendation, PTU is the first-line management for treating this type of patient during first trimester, if available. I remember the statements by my teacher, Bendarkar sir. He's senior most, now he's no more. Sir is having good experience without any significant congenital anomaly with the neomacazole or carbimazole. His experience is very, 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 very vast experience, and the number of congenital anomalies are only a handful. So, congenital anomaly, even though it's described a lot of the congenital anomalies with the carbimazole, very for the last 30 years, I'm still, ideally you should switch over to PT, but you can continue to give small dose of neomacazole also. That is my experience, and I'm following that because I burned my finger. I lost 2 patients, okay, in our gastroenterology department. And is it necessary to change? Yes, probably, yes, you can. If the patient is good rapport, You can start. There is no issue. Any side effect of PTU, I'm not discussing anything about congenital anomaly. Hepatocellular, you should be very careful. And sometimes you will see cases of hepatocellular necrosis. Is it necessary to change to carbimazole? It's not a valid question. Is it necessary to reduce antithyroid drug in third trimester, then restored? Okay, that's a good question. See, yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Ajit, sir. You want to discuss something?
The question is,
no. Okay.
After
So the
20
question
weeks,
is,
after the period of retrogenicity is over, after 12 weeks or 14 weeks, can we change to carbimazole? If the patient is on PTU?
Yes, sir, you can. That's the reason. So first trimester you go for. We'll discuss science first. Documents, professional recommendation. First trimester.
There is some issue with the Jabbar sir's net.
After first trimester, you can go for carb coming down. As per the textbooks, that in certain textbooks mentions that you can stop it, provided patients are happy, no goiter, no of this recommendation, but I don't want to continue I don't want to stop it, because if something happens during the last phase of pregnancy, like severe thyrotoxicosis, that will be a problem. So you can continue very small, lowest possible dose till delivery. After delivery, you can take a final thyroid status assessment. You can take a final decision. Okay.
Dr. Krishnan, what would you say? Would you give carbimazole or propylthiouracil first trimester?
So I would give propylthiouracil. The reason is because, it also depends on the practice that you are in. If you are in an urban practice and if you have, patients are all worried. So I don't believe carbimazole is such a dangerous drug. But unfortunately, there is something called carbimazole embryopathy, which could have problems ranging from aplasia cutis to tracheoesophageal fistula to vitreointestinal duct. We know that these problems can even happen without giving carbimazole. I mean, you can get so from the medico-legal perspective, I would like to give propylthiouracil for the first 3 months and then carbimazole, because it is also in sync with current guidelines. And it's also that, I agree that there is a worry about liver toxicity. But having said that, I think because of the organogenesis, PTU for the first 3 months, and then, of course, it's only carbimazole. If you ask me which one I prefer and have more experience, it's always carbimazole.
Okay. And let's say the TSH comes to normal. Would you continue at the same dose of carbimazole or would you reduce the dose?
I'd certainly reduce the dose, and I'd like to keep the T4 at the upper limit of normal. If it's in the upper half of normal, I'm happy. But even if it's a little bit above, if the T4 is a little bit above normal, I'm not worried. So I may even accept a slight degree of thyrotoxicosis in those patients and keep it there. That would be my... So free T4 between, say, 1.5 to 2, that would be my ideal situation when I'm treating thyrotoxicosis. I'm happy to take a little bit excess T4 in the blood.
Perfect. Can I have
we are not looking at TSH.
One more point I want to add. Sangeeta?
Yes, sir.
So, Parmar, my video is not working. Is it my fault or your fault? My video is not working.
Sir, your internet connection was not stable, so I've stopped your video. You can again
start. Okay, fine. Okay, that's fine. Okay. So, see, for thyrotoxicosis, I want to give another very important information. People are looking for FT3, FT4 TSH during monitoring, all right? In the initial phase of thyrotoxicosis, your TSH will be in suppressed range, okay? And people think that a patient is not responding, and there's a tendency to increase the dose of antithyrotics, which is not correct. In the initial phases, you just go for thyroxine level T3 and T4 and maintain high normal range, okay? TSH may be in a suppressed range. Don't take any drastic steps to stabilize your TSH in the initial phases. Once you have documented normalization of TSH, yes, you can rely on that. That's it.
Thank you. Can I have my next slide?
What about the babies? How do you monitor the babies after delivery?
Oh, the baby, see, it's very important in this case. Okay, this patient, thyroid status is well controlled on medication, you should look into two issues. One is fetal thyrotoxicosis and neonatal thyrotoxicosis. For that, for this patient, non-case of thyrotoxicosis patient, you should ask the status of TSH receptor antibodies to detect fetal thyrotoxicosis, as evidenced by increased movement. Fetal heart rate is more than 160, that is persisting for more than 10 minutes. Okay, and growth acceleration also you should document. That is number 1 point. And subsequently, if it is positive, also you should document the TSH receptor antibodies to predict neonatal thyrotoxicosis. If it is due to TSH receptor antibodies, patient will start developing thyrotoxicosis in the initial 3 months. Okay, and the treatment is initiated appropriately. That's it. Over to Dr. Sangeeta.
Yeah, Dr. Jabbar, do these thyroid receptor blocking antibodies, do they persist in the neonate for a small? I thought they were largely transient.
Yeah, 3 months. 3 months. And yet another comment is, if the thyrotoxicosis persisting more than 12 weeks, think about the possibility of very rare genetic disorders producing thyrotoxicosis in baby.
The next slide, please. Suppose you have a patient, who's getting radioiodine treatment for Graves' disease, and she's contemplating a pregnancy. Dr. Unnikrishnan, how long would you tell her to wait before she actually gets pregnant?
So the recommendation is 6 months.
6 months, okay.
Earlier, in my practice, I used to say 1 year. Now I've realized 6 months is good enough, and that's the consensus. So 6 months is fine.
We used to say 10 months earlier, but now we say 6 months.
Yes.
The next slide.
This patient just taken a radioactive treatment, and after 2 months, she comes with a positive pregnancy test. Will you advise MTP?
Well, I probably will not, because there have been a lot of case studies where radioactive iodine has inadvertently been given without even knowing that somebody is pregnant, and there have been cases really no problems. So I probably would not advise MTP. Having said that, as per the Indian laws, the decision for MTP is to be taken by the gynecologist. So you are on the firing line, sir. But if somebody asks me for a written opinion, I'll say don't terminate.
Actually, even for the fetal thyroid development, it takes 3 months time.
Yeah.
So the baby will be depending on the maternal thyroxine in the first 3 months.
Absolutely.
This was something that happened maybe about 7-8 years ago. We had a primary gravida in Trivandrum at 34 weeks, and she had a mild hypertension, and she came and she's been on treatment since 30 weeks for the mild hypertension, and she came with dyspnea. And she was also hypothyroid, and she was on 125 microgram replacement for the hypothyroidism that was detected much prior to the pregnancy. When she came in, she had a very high pulse rate of 134. Her blood pressure was 150/80. She was definitely tachypneic at 26 per minute. Her chest was clear. She had an oxygen saturation fall, but her preeclampsia profile that we do, all the LFT, the RFT, everything else was normal. And we sent the T4. Actually, we sent the TSH only at that time, and that was very low. I can't really remember what it was. Maybe some point not. There were 2-3 zeros in it as far as I could remember. The TSH was low, and then we looked at the FT4, and that was elevated. Now, this was at a time when we really didn't have access to the antibodies and all that easily. We were thinking that it was a preeclampsia-mediated problem of ARDS or something like that, but her X-ray chest was normal, her ECG was normal, her electrolytes were normal. And because of this increased pulse rate, we asked for an echo and a cardiology opinion, and they said it was a dilated cardiomyopathy, and her left ventricular ejection fraction was only 30%. And then we had, I can't really remember who it was, I think it was Jabbar sir himself who thought that it could be a thyroid storm. So Dr. Unnikrishnan, what would be your take on this? What would you do if it was a thyroid storm? What would you do? She had hypothyroidism and then became hyperthyroidism in pregnancy, probably because of excessive treatment. I'm not sure, but do you really see these storms so frequently?
So we don't see thyroid storm. I can't remember when I last saw a thyroid storm. I think it was more than 15, 16 years ago. Probably could be having thyroid storm because clinical features are consistent. You have tachycardia, you have hypertension, you have cardiomyopathy, so everything, T4 is high, TSH is low. You have a thyroid storm, which is very difficult to explain with just 125 micrograms of thyroxine given for hypothyroidism, unless the patient was never hypothyroid at all. There are some people who give thyroxine even in euthyroid people unnecessarily, so that could be an explanation. But it's very difficult to treat because you'll have to new carbimazole and other antithyroid drugs will not have any effect if it is a drug-induced hyperthyroidism. And you will have to look at other means. You may have to, give adequate beta blockade, some steroids to convert the T4 to T3. Even the PTU may help because it has a peripheral conversion of T4 to T3 may come down. So combination of that might be tried. But I will be very surprised to see such a case of thyroid storm where the patient is taking only 125. Another possibility is that the patient may have had hypothyroidism and can then develop hyperthyroidism. That's very well known because these are all part of the same spectrum of diseases. Graves' disease itself is an autoimmune kind of disease. Dr. Jayaprakash, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree, sir. I think very unlikely with a dose of 125 going to thyroid storm by itself. Maybe she was basically the treatment was not initiated in the correct way, or maybe she has gone into a Graves' disease, which can rarely happen. The autoimmunity is actually two sides of the same coin. So when the stimulating antibodies take over, they can have that.
See, I remember
treating this patient is very difficult because of the pregnancy status. We cannot do much with respect to our antithyroid drugs are not going to act in this regard.
Yeah, I remember that, she was on the thyroxine, but never had her TSH estimated frequently and continued to take the thyroxine. Anyway, when she came in, as far as we know, we stopped the thyroxine and gave her a bit of antithyroid drugs, gave her some steroids, and we terminated the pregnancy because we really were not sure whether it was a thyroid storm or whether. So we waited for a day or two and then terminated the pregnancy. I can't really remember how, but she had a very benign postpartum course and she was all right. I have no idea what happened to her after that, but what kind of patients do you actually see a thyroid storm in? Is it like this, or do you see it in vesicular moles before termination? What is it that you really see? Should we be worried about it?
Well, I don't think you should look for thyroid storm because very, very rare. Dr. Jabbar is back, I think.
I lost the connection in between. Okay.
His connection is unstable. No?
Oh,
yeah. So
is it?
Dr. Jabbar, can you please restart your router once again?
Yeah. Meanwhile, I think Nishan sir can finish off the.
Maybe Ajit, you can go ahead and then we'll come back later.
Okay, we will discuss it later. Now we'll take up some of the gynecological issues. So this is a case of this is about infertility and recurrent miscarriage. Actually, it was discussed. Any place for screening for thyroid dysfunction in patients coming for infertility treatment or recurrent miscarriage?
Certainly, sir. I think we must screen for thyroid dysfunction in anybody with infertility, recurrent miscarriages, or even delayed, fertility or subfertility. That's my take.
Is it necessary to do the anti-TPO antibodies, thyroid antibodies?
Not unless the TSH is more than 2.5. The TSH is more than 2.5. There are two advantages, sir. One is that, as I said, there's a trial which showed that between 2.5 to 4 TSH TPO positive giving thyroxine will help. But more than anything else in clinical practice, gynecologists will be seeing the patient during the pregnancy and before the pregnancy. But when we see the patient, patients in general practice have a tendency to stop their thyroxine. They will stop it for months and then they will get pregnant. So giving an anti-TPO, what I tell my patients who come with hypothyroidism is, once I do the TPO, I'll say, see, I'm going to do this test called TPO. It will diagnose autoimmune disease. If you have autoimmune thyroid disease, if the antibody is positive, you are likely to need the therapy lifelong. So this is an additional point in convincing the patient about the causality of the hypothyroidism. And also, once they are convinced about the causality and that nothing can be done about the causality, they will be likely to continue the treatment long term. This is not in any evidence-based guidelines. This is just a practice point which I'm sharing.
Sometimes we see, because patient will be coming with all the investigation report, a normal TSH less than 2.5, but antibody positive. Is it necessary to treat?
No, probably below 2.5 antibody positive, I would leave alone completely. I can't remember treating any patient like that.
Okay. Another scenario is for the prior to surgery, if patient with abnormal uterine bleeding because of the fibroid uterus, planning an elective hysterectomy. It's not an emergency surgery, it's an elective hysterectomy. Investigation showed TSH 10. And all other investigations normal. Can we proceed with surgery, or is it necessary to postpone the surgery?
Now, in my practice, as long as the T3 and T4 are normal, I don't postpone the surgery. If T3 and T4 are normal, just a few weeks of thyroxine, a few days of thyroxine, 4 to 5 days of thyroxine is enough. Of course, if it's an elective procedure in the OPD and you have time to wait, it's better to give thyroxine and wait and do. But supposing the patient has got admitted and tomorrow is the third surgery, TSH is 10, T4 and T3 are normal, I would just straight away give clearance for surgery. Now, it's a different situation where, the patient's T4 is low, T3 is low, TSH is 10. Then you are in a little bit of trouble, even if the surgery is the next day, for medical legal reasons. In those times, I give, thyroxine maybe 75 for 5 days, do the T4 once more, normalize the T4 and take it. So these are some of my suggestions. Dr. Jayaprakash, your views. This is a gray area in guidelines and we have to go according to our, practice tips and tricks.
Yes, sir. I think if the free T4, if provided you have a good lab value, free T4 is in the normal range, you are safe to proceed with the surgery. But if it's an emergency procedure, I think the last part of the question, if it's for malignancy, if it's an emergency procedure, then you may need to, if the free T4 is still low, as you said, please give a higher dose for 5 days and then retest, and probably you're not looking at TSH over there.
It is a hyperthyroidism patient, low TSH and high T4. Can we plan this selective surgery?
So it is low TSH and high T4. And if the patient is not having any symptoms of hyperthyroidism, because high T4 and low TSH is hyperthyroidism, patient is not having any symptoms, then with adequate beta blockade, you can go ahead for surgery. But if the patient is symptomatic and you are finding clinically an unstable patient, it is better to find out the cause, diagnose, treat, stabilize, and take up. But actually, as Dr. Jayaprakash said, emergency, if it's not elective, just go ahead and give beta blockade and go ahead.
Actually, our anesthesia colleagues insist on TSH being brought down because they fear slow recovery, especially if GA is given.
Yes,
that is the concern.
That's always there because of the hypothermia and other problems. Recovery is quite slow in hypothyroid patients. So wherever possible, we'll have to treat. But I think these are all real life situations where patient is in front of you, and for various practical reasons, you may have to make some detour in your approach. But I agree with you. But wherever possible, get the patient euthyroid and take up.
Any other issue we have to discuss, Dr. Sangeeta, Dr. Betsy?
Can I ask one question? Can I ask?
Yes,
now, patients with infertility, you said whenever they go for ART, they need controlled ovarian hyperstimulation. So how is it going to affect the thyroid status, and what is your advice regarding maintaining the thyroid function for that patient? Controlled ovarian hyperstimulation, not gonadotropins being given.
Well, I'm not sure what exactly different I would do. I probably keep the thyroid function normal. But Dr. Jayaprakash, your views on that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that frequently come up is TSH going low because there is a spillover effect of the FSH and analogs which are being given. And frequently we see these patients, once they are into a couple of cycles, the TSH starts going down. And there are situations where this can have an impact in terms of the decision of, say, if the patient was hypothyroid, you're giving a stable dose of thyroxine. Then during the ovulation stimulation, the TSH starts coming down. And we need to look at that case-based scenario and modify the dose. Sometimes if drastic reduction of dose is done, when they get pregnant, the TSH may suddenly go up. So these are situations, I think, where we do thyroid function test more frequently, at least once in 30 days, just before induction, and immediately after the pregnancy test is positive, we ask them to do thyroid function test. And during pregnancy also, in these induced pregnancies, we are more frequent in doing thyroid function tests, because we've seen rapid fluctuations in the thyroid function test, and dosage may need to be adjusted. Many times, unfortunately, if the pregnancy outcome, or if it doesn't carry on, or it goes into miscarriage, it's frequently the thyroid which is being blamed. So that's one scenario where we are proactive and doing, even though the guidelines suggest once in 6 weeks, probably once in 3 weeks or 30 days, I think we are justified in doing a thyroid function test and modifying the dose accordingly.
Any comments from Dr. Venu, because he is into the infertility practice, IVF practice?
No, I think that was well said. We just try to normalize the thyroid levels and then start. So I think
one point I want to add is that metformin can suppress the TSH a little bit. So that's important to remember. Metformin can suppress the TSH. Another point which maybe gynecologists may not be always aware of is biotin. We endocrinologists are very aware of it, because biotin is used as a supplement by many patients. Now the problem with biotin is it doesn't do anything to the thyroid, but it interferes with the thyroid function test. So it can give grossly abnormal thyroid function test. So if you find some bizarre test, it could go into hypothyroidism or hyperthyroidism. And if the patient is taking a vitamin supplement biotin, and if the thyroid function is becoming not easy to interpret, then please try to withdraw that biotin and see, because that is emerging as an important cause of discordance in thyroid function test.
Dr. Unnikrishnan, what about all these thiocyanates and the brassica family, cabbage, cauliflower? Do you really tell them not to have all this? The hypothyroids that you see?
So, what I remember, Professor R.B. Jayakumar, sir, is not here, but, he used to tell, he used to have a lot of nice, he still has a lot of nice statements he tells the patient. So, patient will ask him, doctor, should I eat cabbage or not eat cabbage? So, Professor Jayakumar would say, Pooty Kadakana factory is strike that a carry or no. That means he will say that there's no point, because the thyroid already damaged. You can't damage it more by eating cabbage and cauliflower. The second, that's of course his favorite line, which I sometimes adapt if I think the patient will take it in a good humor. But most of the times I tell the patient that cabbage, cauliflower, etc. contain nano quantities of thyroid damaging goitrogen. So you'll have to eat a huge amount of cabbage to damage your thyroid, which we don't eat. So please continue to eat your cabbage and cauliflower as long as you are not going on some cabbage diet, like you have fruitarian diets and Mediterranean diets and all that. As long as you're not going on such a diet, a little bit of cabbage, cauliflower is okay. And some patients ask about soya. So the soya can interfere with the absorption of the thyroxine tablets. So don't have soya with breakfast. Now you will think that soya is not eaten for breakfast. And I have also never eaten soya for breakfast. But I found some patients who are on different kinds of diet, vegan diets and these diets, they take soya milk for breakfast. So you have to be careful, and that is something you'll have to consider. So soya can prevent the absorption of thyroxine. But really, cabbage, cauliflower, I don't really restrict. And I really like Dr. Jayakumar's quote, because that really puts it into perspective for the patient.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much.